All right, greetings. Welcome to Africans Arise. Thank you very much for joining this live stream on Wednesday, the 10th of March, 2021. If you haven't already subscribed to this YouTube channel, then please do subscribe and make sure that you smash that like button. I'll be leaving several reminders throughout the stream to smash that like button, which helps YouTube to get the video to the people who might be interested in watching it. So, today's topic: mothering, modernity, and African liberation, or African revolutionary struggle. What does something so tender and soft as mothering have to do with African revolutionary struggle, you may be asking? Well, in this latest Africans Arise Live, I'm honored to welcome back Dr Iyelli Ichile to help us kind of get into this question. Now, according to Dr Ichile, while modernity might be a new term to most of us, it describes something that's embedded deep in African, continental, and diasporic history, culture, and spirituality. Building on foundations laid by other Africana scholars, Dr. Ichile identifies modernity as, quote, an organizing principle and a praxis that has guided intertwined spiritual, militaristic, and political strategies of African people under slavery and colonization, leading to some of the most effective African liberation movements in our history. In this conversation, I'll seek to get a deeper insight into Dr. Ichile's research into this fascinating and hugely important subject. So, Sister Iyelli Ichile, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
All right, it's a pleasure again to have you back. So, just to let everyone know a little bit about Iyelli Ichile. So, Dr. Ichile teaches history in the Department of Social Sciences at Prince George's Community College, where she also serves as the director of the African American Studies Institute. She has a PhD in the history of the African diaspora from Howard University and a master's in African American Studies from Columbia University. Her most important education, as she's put it here, however, took place in her mother's home. Now, I've done a little bit of a research here, digging around, and it seems that your first name, Iyelli. Oh, hello. Are we all still there?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Your first name, Iyelli, means she carries herself well, or she carried herself well. And that's, I believe that's in the language of your father from the...
Yes. Bechebe.
Yes. Yes. Bechebe in Nigeria/Cameroon region of West Africa. So that's just important because I think you do carry yourself well. So well done for embodying that.
I'm working on it.
So yeah, and while in graduate school, Iyelli developed a research agenda that has been supported by the Smithsonian Folklife Center, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, and the Reginald F. Lewis Museum, and several university grants, because all of this stuff costs money, and so it's a great thing that she's been receiving funding for her work. And very pertinent for our conversation today, her work is an exploration of the roles of women of African descent in Black freedom movements. She specifically examines the connections between African military cultures, spirituality, art, and interpersonal relationships as they relate to African liberation struggles. So that is a perfect segue into our topic for today. And I thought I'd just ask maybe spend the first part of our conversation conceptualizing this modernity idea. So the obvious first questions are kind of around, what is it? So could you just to kick us off, give us a little bit of a flavor as to what this term means, or what you mean by this term modernity?
Okay, good. I mean, so my meaning, my approach to modernity and what I find useful in it is a little bit of a departure from what other African women scholars have kind of offered. I took what I read about how mothering is a foundational unit of African relationships, nation buildings, and sustainability practices. I took that and really wanted to unpack it further and understand how I can use this concept to talk about liberation struggles, which is what I'm interested in, because I really did see a connection. So my approach to modernity really does connect the concept of motherhood with modernity. What I didn't hear a lot of these women scholars discussing, to the degree that I wanted, was the ways in which modernity is a product of enslavement, chattel enslavement of Africans, of racial slavery, of white supremacy, of the building of the modern age on the backs of, with the blood, sweat, and tears of people of African descent, and then other indigenous people in other parts of the world. And so I really wanted to understand the ways in which I'd heard other scholars refer to Africans as essentially the first modern humans, because essentially we ushered in the modern age, whether we wanted to or not. And so how does motherhood help us respond to the ravages of modernity, the building by force of modernity? So I wanted to know how we maintained our sanity, how we maintained a certain ethics, how we cared for each other and nurtured each other, but also how we fought and defended each other in the name of something called freedom. And modernity really has been useful. It's been really useful. I wrote a whole dissertation about the participation of enslaved African women in liberation struggles without it. And then I discovered this term later and I'm like, oh, this would have been really helpful when I was doing all this research, to really try to understand what connects Queen Nanny of the Maroons with Queen Mother Moore, with, Marie Laveau in Louisiana, with, Cuba in Jamaica. Like, how are all these women connected? What is their relationship to their people? And, so I think, and African languages have a lot of this concept just kind of all up and through the languages. And what I mean by that is, the concept of badenya, for instance, which is a term we find in Senegambia. Badenya, right? It's in contradistinction to fadenya. So badenya is the relationship of the children of a common mother, the children who all have the same mother, regardless of if they have different fathers. The children of the same mother, ethic. There's a relationship. There are taboos. There are things that they can and should do with each other, ways that they should treat each other, and then there are things that are just that are forbidden, things that they should not, for instance, spilling blood, like, obviously taking the life of a brother or a sister. And I feel like that those principles, those ethics, have guided us all as children of Africa. So modernity really begins with Africa as the common mother of all of us. How have we operated as children of the common mother under that understanding? Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Just like, there's about 4 of my questions there that you touched on there. So thank you. Definitely want to come back to a lot of those figures that you mentioned, the nannies, and so some of those women a little bit later. So I was going to ask you about the modernity thing. So thank you for kind of explaining how the modernity thing fits in for you with regard to this modernity. So for you, it's about how our people responded to the ravages of modernity. So thank you for that. So it might be useful actually if you mentioned some of the scholars who had previously used this term of modernity, and I know you've sent me, you sent me a few names, and I've heard you mention a few names. Maybe it might be an idea to maybe start with what their kind of version of modernity is.
Sure.
And then afterwards we can unpack a little bit, a bit more, delve more in depth as to how you've kind of put your own personal spin on it and applied it to liberation struggles.
Sure. I want to focus really on a scholar named Diane Diakite. She writes an article, and the title is Matricentric Foundations. And she really is talking about matrifocality, focusing on the mother as the kind of building block of a family, a community, and how we can understand the mother-child relationships. Yeah, there it is. As the kind of foundation, matricentric foundations of Africana women's religious practices of peace building, sustainability, and social change. Right. So all of that is in the title. All of that is in the article. And I think meeting her at a summer scholars research program was really instrumental in all of this. This was published in a journal about ecumenical theology, which is quite interesting to me. This really focuses on women helping women, women helping children, women coming together as collectives to sustain Black life, essentially. I think my approach is a little bit different because it's I don't want folks to understand it as merely a reaction or, response only to slavery and colonization. I think what it is taking the most potent aspects of what has already been there, was already a part of who we were as Africans before the crisis, and transplanting those things, taking the most potent, durable, useful aspects of those things, those relationships, those ethics, those rituals, etc., to not just survive, but to fight against what was happening to us. So it is a continuum. It's not like everything was fine in Africa and then all of a sudden we had to figure out how to build relationships to get ourselves free. We had the relationships. We took the understanding and the worldview and the orientation toward loving and caring and fighting for each other, and we had to we had to use it in some ways differently or more intensely in this new environment. So I like that she talks about things like resource management, because that is something mothers do. She talks about how we strategize, how we have accountability, right? That's a very important aspect of mothers. I think where I depart in another way from, I guess, this understanding of Jakite and Flora Edway Kaplan and others is that I really want to talk about modernity as not just a creative, nurturing, life-sustaining thing, but something that is not just creative, but destructive as well. And that there's a place for destructive. There's a place for destructiveness. Modernity and motherhood itself has fangs. It's not all soft, like you said in your intro. It's not all fluffy, nurturing, and soft. There is a very serious, to whatever degree it is necessary, a violent aspect to motherhood. Mothers defend and protect their children. Mothers become warriors and combatants when necessary. And I think that is something we really have to grapple with and learn to accept. My father's people, the Becheve, the women in our culture, have a song that they sing. They say, "We are the creators and the destroyers," right? And so the women folk are very clear, that they're the creators, the destroyers, they're the kingmakers. And so nothing happens without the approval of the women, but they embraced this eons ago, that being a mother, being a collective of women, an active group of women in your society, means that you're not just creating and giving birth to babies, but you're also destroying things that don't serve the higher needs and higher purpose of your community, that are not healthy for your community. They gotta go. That's something a mother has to be comfortable doing. So I wanted to really focus on that, because that tendency, that destructive thing was something we had to use more than maybe we would have.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So should I? Yeah. What are some of the? So you talked about the destructive side. I'm definitely going to come back to the kind of destructive, breaking down as well as building up. What for you? What are the key principles that underpin modernity? Then you've touched on them all, but maybe if you could maybe extrapolate or elaborate a little bit about some of those things. The unity and the love and so forth.
One of my favorite things to discuss within modernity is the fact that it is, above all else, a metaphysical force of nature. It is something that is also spiritual. One of the things that we don't tend to want to put on the table when we're talking about African liberation, well, some of us, I won't speak for all of us. For some of us, we don't want to talk about spirituality, and we don't want to talk about the, again, the necessary destructive aspect of spirituality. We want to talk about herbal medicine, but we don't want to talk about poison. We want to talk about praying for the betterment of our lives, the elevation of our families and ancestors, but we don't want to talk about how we've had to also pray against some things. And I think that is something that is really important, because the modernity really, again, gives me the language to talk about how there is such thing as spiritual warfare. And
okay.
If we don't discuss this, if we don't talk about how our movements have been guided by spirit, and that there's a place for that, we actually eliminate much of what women did in this in this whole history, and we also don't really, we lose a huge understanding, a huge chunk of how we might understand the motivations, what built trust amongst those people who had to kind of do these amazing, intensely violent things together. How do we trust each other? How do we feel okay with taking human life when it was necessary? Killing our oppressors, for instance, right? It had to be guided by spirit, and someone also had to deal with trauma. Modernity is important because there's trauma, and then there's how we heal from that. So again, those are the things that are really important that I would like to focus on, because if we're not dealing with the metaphysical force and aspects of motherhood, then we got a lot of blind spots.
Okay, and what do you mean by it's a metaphysical force? Then do you mean someone might hear that and think, oh, you mean it's a spirit? It's like a personal being of some sort, or is it more of a force that moves?
My apologies. Yeah, okay. I don't want to be unclear. Let me.
No. It's just unpacking more and more. So yeah, go on. It's fascinating to me. So.
Okay, yeah, I got up really, really early this morning, so I'm having a super discombobulated day. But I think what I'm trying to say is modernity is not itself a spirit, but modernity or motherhood itself, the force of motherhood, is something that is transcendent. The Yoruba have a saying, for instance, that's been circulating quite a bit on the internet this week. When the Yoruba want to report you to humans, right? If you've transgressed in society in some kind of way, if they want to report you to human authorities, they mention your father's name. If they report you to the Orisha, to the deities, they mention your mother's name. And African proverbs have so many different ways of saying, like, your mother is that direct link to God and accountability on levels beyond human authorities.
Tell me a few more, please, if you could tell me a few more of those proverbs. I'd love to hear them.
There's one that's really simple. Mother is the first God that a child knows, that a child recognizes.
Yeah.
There are so many African proverbs about how the mother's body is a child's first home. The mother is the portal between the spirit world and the world of the flesh. But what they're trying to say is, even if we're not talking just about biological motherhood, that motherhood is well beyond the biological. It is spiritual first, and that we all owe our existence to the choices our mothers made to bring us here, regardless of how we feel about her once we get here. And also, this is important because for people under the duress of slavery and colonization, we don't always have the luxury of leaning on a biological mother. And this is why modernity is also really important. The care and nurture and defense and protection and strategy that we need to receive from a mother can come from other people who are not biologically our mother. Your mother could have been sold away, your mother could have been killed, your mother could have been. So who are the mothers? Who are the people who mother you? Because another thing about modernity that's important is, under slavery and colonization, African people have been dehumanized in the eyes of the Western world. And there's been obviously an abundant amount of energy put into dehumanizing us in our own eyes, right? And we're still trying to recover from those things. But another African wisdom teaching is that having a mother makes you human. right? So if you have a mother, then you are recognized as a human being. A motherless child is the worst thing you could possibly be, because then they have effectively taken away that verification of your humanity. And so having a mother and acquiring mothers, people mothering you, is how you cultivate, and you are cultivated into being a human, a fully actualized human being. A mother reflects and mirrors for you your humanity. And when you're acting outside of good character in that humanity, when you're not doing it right, right? So I think that all of those things are why it's necessary. She is necessary, or he is necessary, whoever is mothering you.
Mm. Thank you. You've one of the lecture that you sent me to listen to. You mentioned that point about the absence of mothers, and that I found that really interesting, because I had a Negro conservative period a few.
I like that. Negro.
Yeah, it's not mine, unfortunately. I got it from Twitter, but but just anyway, we've all heard the kind of trope about single mothers, you know, and absent fathers is the thing. Absent fathers, I should say, stress the right word, is the thing that's the problem. And so I rarely heard anybody else really talk about the lack of mothers. So I found that really fascinating that you've sort of pinpointed that as something that is a phenomenon. It's something that we've had to deal with.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's the same type of crisis today in terms of motherlessness as it once was during, again, that initial period of crisis. But I will say, African motherhood or Black motherhood has been consistently damned in our society, limited. The state is always trying to intervene on our motherhood and limit our ability to mother as we see fit. Our motherhood is challenged in so many ways by our own the fact that we have to deal with living in these conditions that we live in. So I think it's still with us to some degree, and fatherlessness is certainly an issue. I think our current struggle with motherlessness is really about our disconnection from Africa itself as the mother. So I really do think that that's where it resides for us now. John Henrik Clarke says, you know, we have the luxury out here in the diaspora to associate with all of Africa, because we were kind of ripped from these very specific societies in Africa, and we don't have necessarily all the keys to know what that is anymore. You know, so in identifying Africa as our mother, you know, there are some people who choose to give her up, right? There are constant debates on the internet about whether we cease to be Africans because we weren't born and raised there anymore. Some people willingly give up their mother, and I believe those people are lost. And then others of us seek her out because there's something in us that tells us that's the key to understanding our humanity and accessing health. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you mentioned the Africa, Mama Africa, is kind of like the you know, the symbolic mother, kind of quintessential symbolic mother amongst our people. And you've talked about how you know, I mean, I know in your other lecture you've talked about you know, Mama Africa, sorry, the motherland. You know how we talk about the land as the motherland. And what I was going to ask you was are there any other, if you could talk a little bit about some of the other symbolic mothers that exist within our, you know, our global cultures and traditions and cosmologies and so forth.
Yeah, well, I try to really talk about it the way it looks in my head, which is almost like not a hierarchy, but it's there are levels of this metaphysical, cosmological, ontological understanding of mother. So to be human in African worldviews is to be an individual with a mother. Africa is our mother. The earth is our mother, right? And so that's why there's so much earth reverence. And it's also because we understand very clearly that this is the sustainer of all life. And so we must honor the earth. We must build a relationship and maintain a relationship with the earth. I think that's also why I'm shifting into a greater focus on environmentalism and environmental justice for African people, because one, it is a very racial issue, but two, because we really need to reconnect with our original relationships and covenants that we have with Mother Earth. And then we have the other deities, the other Orisha, the other Loa, the other Neteru, the other Abosom, like the other aspects of creation that connect us with aspects of the earth, the cosmos, nature in general. And I think that those we find mothers even in that, the feminine Orisha mother us in various ways. And also during, again, slavery and colonization, looking to Oshun, looking to Oya to model what healthy African womanhood should look like is important. Why we kept those traditions. You know, if you don't have a mother, a physical woman to raise you and model what being a good, healthy, strong woman looks like, what can you look to? Well, the people in your community, the people on your work site, they honor Oshun. And they have a little private ceremony, little rituals, festivals, dolls, all kinds of iconography that you can look to and say, well, this is what I want to be like as a woman. This is what I want to be. This is what feminine power, feminine energy looks like. These are the things that can keep me healthy. Oshun's herbs, Oshun's, this is how I can keep my womb healthy, for instance, right? I'm being constantly told I'm a beast of burden. My sexual and reproductive rights have been stripped from me. How do I maintain sanity and health? I can look to these idealized feminine energies, these forces of nature to guide me and inform my life. So that, I think that's what I mean. Motherhood exists on all of those different levels. And particularly it becomes important when we have kind of an absence of the more traditional mother in our lives.
Beautiful. In your lecture, which I keep talking about, and someone's understandably asked, Craig Bardo has asked, can we get a link to the lecture? Yes.
Oh, yes. It's on Africa World Now on SoundCloud, right? I think it was a SoundCloud link I sent you.
Okay.
So I can look it up or put it in the chat.
We'll post it in there. So thank you for that. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard, Leah Boggs. Nice to have you on board. And Akadia Eli said that Wangari Maathai wrote a book on it. I believe that's probably talking about the environmental aspect. Yeah. So beautiful stuff. Thank you for everybody who's in the live stream. Just want to remind everybody, please, to smash that like button if you would. Click the like button. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already subscribed, and do post any questions and comments that you've got in the chat. We'll make sure that we cover those in good time during the stream. So thank you, everyone for being here. So we've talked a little bit about what symbolic mothers, talk about what modernity, kind of, the concepts of modernity. I wanted to ask you actually, one of the things I said that we talk about is whether some of these concepts of motherhood and modernity, African-centered concepts, differ from Eurocentric, modern, what we're kind of raised to understand mothering or motherhood. Are there any key differences that you point to, or is it one of those things that maybe it does exist in European culture and history, but it's been kind of trampled down by capitalism and, patriarchal modernity?
Yeah. I mean, I've studied Europe enough to understand. I've attempted to understand enough to understand what they have done and do in the world. But I wouldn't say that I'm, a European historian, scholar, expert. But what I will say is, in a way that is kind of perhaps an interesting parallel to what I see happening with maybe a return to African culture and African spiritual culture. There are European folks who are now looking to their pre-Christian traditions, their so-called pagan traditions, which are also earth-based traditions, to try to find some guidance outside of imperialist Christianity and all the other globalizing religions. And I think that what they're discovering is similar to what we're discovering, which is there is a way of looking at the world that predates the patriarchy and the capitalism that might be healthier for us. And I think in that we might find some examples of approaches to motherhood and modernity, or you know, what we're talking about, motherhood, that are more like what we're discussing now.
Yeah.
Be that as it may, I can neither confirm nor deny that. I'm focused on us, but I think one of the major differences that we find, again, in the modern age and after, is that we have a history that it shows us that motherhood avoids what Rebecca Hall calls the prose of passivity. I think in Western modern European traditions, motherhood is seen as something limiting. It is a woman bearing a child in service of a man, but ultimately the child belongs to him. It is, you know, the family, the inheritance, all power and authority being traced through the penile line of descent. And the woman is kind of just a conduit for that. And it's interesting because you could even look at the ways in which, for instance, British or English colonial laws were written in service of fathers, and you know, the denigration of mothers, right? In people born in the Virginia colony, for instance, would take on the status of the father. Once these English men started raping these African women, and the African women were giving birth to mixed race children, they had to change the laws to really, in some ways, contradict that whole penile line of descent thing, and say the children would now take on the status of the mothers. Well, in many African societies, children always and automatically took on the status of their mothers. Your lineage is traced through the uterine line. And so, you know, it's interesting, because then you really see that so much of what we're living under is about what serves and maintains the status quo, what maintains the power structure. And our motherhood has never been like a passive motherhood that someone else can just act upon. It's always been a motherhood with fangs. It's always been a fierce motherhood that is interested in protecting children, and thereby protecting families, and thereby protecting communities, and thereby protecting nations. It's always been that way. I know John Henrik Clarke talks about how the family is the building block of a nation, but there are even steps in between. You know, the essential building block of a family is the mother-child relationship, and then you get to family, and then you get to community, and then you get to nation. And I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that you know, this is something that we still operate in these ways. It's not to say that fathers are irrelevant or unimportant. It is simply to say that this is mother-child relationship is how we verify who belongs to whom. And mothers do tend to think about the entire community. We think about the babies, we think about what's good for the elders, right? And so this is also why, when we're talking about liberation movements, having women and really people approach movement building from the perspective of a mother means that we're thinking about how all these people involved in this action that we're about to take, whatever it is, how will their basic life needs be met so that they can get out here on the battlefield? Who's taking care of the babies while we're on the battlefield? Who's taking care of the elderly folks while we're on the battlefield? Who's protecting them back? What's happening on the home front? Mothering means that you have an orientation to, you know, that would cause you to think about those things. Those are concerns that, you know, your priorities are those of a mother, so that people don't get left out. You know, it's not, you know, and I think that that's something that's really served us. And we see so many women involved in these movements that are really, you know, they help make these movements not sustainable past one generation because of that orientation.
Whoa. Gosh. So you mentioned a couple of things. Do you think, so talking about matrilineality, that's the right word, yeah, and patrilineality, or penal penal inheritance, penile inheritance.
I don't even know if that's a phrase. I just made that up. I don't even know if that's a thing. Penile inheritance.
That's a great phrase, though. It's so it's like, yep, know exactly what you mean. I was going to say, so there are cultures or tribes, nations, peoples in Africa. You know, some are matrilineal, some are patrilineal. So my people, for example, the Bamasaba in Uganda are patrilineal, but it's the connection with the mother's line is still extremely strong. It's a bit bewildering actually when you start to get into it, because it's like you basically keep both sides always there, and it's like, you know, it's not like, okay, cool, you got, you know, the mum goes, no, the woman goes off and joins the man's house, and then just it's pretty much cut ties with her side of the family. It's like, nope, you know, it's even as part of the rites of passage thing, which is a male circumcision rite, but a big part of that, the mother's family plays a big part in that. You have to go to the mother's house, you know, families, explain all your intentions, what you're going to be doing, and the mother's family, you know, bestows upon you a bunch of gifts and gives you a new name, and then, you know, so and me personally, I'm much closer to my mum's side of the family than my dad's side. They're both together still. I know both sides, but my mum's side is just the stronger side. So do you have any ideas or thoughts on whether there was like an original system, you know, were we originally matrilineal and then it,
you know, yeah, there have been some compelling arguments made that even the societies in Africa where we find patrilineality, that this is just a more modern way of approaching this, and that we really all were matrilineal at some point, and this is why we have the vestiges of that in our families and the dynamics you were just articulating, right? So like my father's culture is similar. They actually say there's two ways to get married. You can get married matrilineally, or you can get married patrilineally. And we have an issue right now with child marriages, because they've tended to lean toward the patrilineal system of marriage, which tends to be very oppressive for young girls. And I would say that, trying to look into the history of it, this is something that we can directly attribute to British colonization and Dutch colonization, or German colonization, or French, or whatever. But that there's a matrilineal marriage, which they call the love marriage, which is really a woman gets to choose and have a voice in what happens and who she marries. That system is older than the patrilineal system. They'll tell you that. And I think that might be true for many societies in Africa, which is also why the mother side of the family tends to really, again, claim that ownership, because it's not just the moja, the blood that you get from the mother, and we saw her birth you into the world and it's verifiable, but it's verifiable spiritually. Wow. You know, and I think that means a lot to African people. In my studies of these you know, these liberation struggles, particularly again during slavery, these people were not about to go and put their lives on the line if there was no, you know, green light from a higher authority, God or the gods. You know, they needed to trust something beyond just humans, because I think there's also an acknowledgement that humans are, you know, fallible. So mothers really are the bearers and the direct connection to that higher authority, and I think that can't quite be killed in Africans. And there was an attempt, right? There were multiple attempts to kill that spiritual authority. We can talk about the British and how they tried to steal the Sikajua, the golden stool of the Ashanti Empire, once they figured out that the people believe this is the collective soul of their nation. Then the British were like, oh, we got to have it. The Queen was like, oh, we got to have it. We got to take it because we want to demoralize these people and break them down, right? And you know, who was someone who came to the defense of the stool and said, we're going to fight for this? A woman. We got to get this back. Queen Santua said, no, this is not going to stand. If the men folk aren't going to stay in the fight, then I'll gather the women to do it. And so I think that there's something to that.
And there was one other thing you said as well, which makes me think. You talked about how, and you have talked about in different places I've seen, about you mentioned that the mother and the child is like the basic component of the community. And I wanted to just run something by you, see what you think. Going back to the whole single parent home thing. trope. It is a trope. It's a massive
Yeah.
old trope that's used to bash black people on the head to say, you know, why is there so many single parent families, single mothers, you know, all this stuff. And do you think that because there is a prevalence, you know, there is a high proportion of lone parent families or mother, you know, and I mean even that's like this, you know, it's a Western Eurocentric, you know, terminology, single parent family, as if that's just the one. And this kind of speaks to what we're talking about, because you know, talking about the socio-ontological motherhood, which we'll go into in a bit. But do you think that perhaps there may be some throw over from some of our cultural traditions, whereby mothers, particularly in polygynous marriages, it kind of was that, you know, there'd be a, you know, wife would have her own compound and would have her children with her, and it was kind of like an independent economic unit. That's the Ichile talks about, I know, in her essay with regard to the people of I think the Igbo, one of the Igbo nations. So
and I think she focused on the Nobi Igbo.
Yes, yeah. So do you think there might be some sort of, I don't know, that cultural heritage that some of our people have, many of our people have, might help to explain why actually
it's okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not that it's okay, right? It's not ideal, right? Particularly again in the North American wilderness, you know, the wilderness of the Western world, as Malcolm X might have referred to it. It's not okay here, right? In an African society, in a society that is not being ravaged by colonialism, colonization, yes, I think we really do have tons of examples where, and even still today, where we have polygamy. The mother is responsible for the well-being of her children, and she might work, you know, collaboratively with the other co-wives. But ultimately, the children she birthed into the world are her responsibility. So it's even like in many societies, the basic economic unit, the basic unit of production is a woman and her children, right? And so the father may live elsewhere, right? And then he just goes and visits each wife at her compound with her children, and that is really, you know, you can look at the African women of the marketplace to see more examples of how this plays out. And so I don't think that everything we see Black people doing is a result of trauma, but simply just an orientation to, like, this is, despite, no matter what else is going on, this is going to be true. This is going to be stable. This is the basis. This is where we start and finish. People may come and go. Society may create conditions where we can't count on or rely on all these other things. It may not always work out how we want it to, but mother and children. And again, I want to say that could be a father and his children, right? In these environments where he has to mother and nurture them and defend them and strategize for them and mirror for them in certain ways. So I don't, again, I think I want us to move to understanding this as a concept and a relationship that transcends gender. Although we're acknowledging it is gendered feminine, right, traditionally, but that this is a praxis and an ethic and an operating system that humans can do for other humans and with other humans. I think that's really an important point that you're making, Ellie, as well, because we really have to stop letting people impose pathologies and dysfunctions on us. We don't have to own all of that, right? They've convinced us to be afraid to like watermelon, for instance, and be ashamed over here, at least over here in the US South, to be ashamed of liking watermelon. I mean, to the degree that they called watermelons nigger apples. But our people discovered that watermelons were key to hydrating themselves because watermelons could grow easily within rows of cotton soil. So if you weren't getting water breaks because they didn't care if you passed out from sunstroke or heat stroke or dehydration, you throw some watermelon seeds in the ground, you're going to eventually get some watermelon. You can crack one open, eat, hydrate yourself, get your nutrients, and then keep moving, right? That's how we survive. And at some point, someone told us to be ashamed of that relationship with watermelon. It's not that we just like it because it's so tasty. It's because it's a part of our survival tradition. And we should embrace that and acknowledge that this is the ingenuity of our ancestors, the resilience of our ancestors. And so a single mother raising a child should not be seen only as pathology. Yes, ideally, we would want her to have support of a husband, a support of her family, the support of her community, obviously. But to shame her or to say that this is only dysfunction and not see the fact that this is her continuing to be African, her continuing to follow an ethic and a praxis and a level of accountability and responsibility that is soul deep. If you don't acknowledge that too, then I think you're just not, you're not helping us move toward liberation. You're not seeing the full picture.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I think it's so important as well. I mean, this stream was kind of done to coincide with International Women's Day. But I think, I mean, I know of, you know, in my extended family, I've got so many so-called quote unquote single mothers, you know, and just, it's, you know, I'm just thinking, imagine the impact that could be had if our mindset wasn't the basically condemnation mindset, but was more of a, and you know what, I say we, I mean, I think a lot of the time, a lot of our people don't have a condemning mindset actually toward so-called single mothers and families where there's just one parent. Actually, I think it's pretty embedded in the way that we do things, and people don't see it necessarily even problematic. As you say, you know, maybe we sometimes miss the wider picture, which is that, like you say, without the wider support, without the wider involvement of the extended family and so forth and support structures, then it can be a burden on the
And I think, furthermore, I think the terminology gets us all messed up. Like, I'm technically a single mother, according to some people's definition, right? Because I'm not married to my daughter's father anymore. We don't live in the same household. But I don't consider myself a single mother because he and I are doing a wonderful job co-parenting. You know what I mean? Like, I feel I still have the support. I still have the support of her father in raising her. I still have the support of my family and his family in raising her. We just don't live under the same roof. And I'm like, well, I've seen thousands and thousands of years of it looking just like this. You know what I mean? Where we didn't have to live under the same roof to work together and give love and guidance to this child that we created, and also share resources and all those other things. So I think that again, we're African, trying to like jump through all the hoops and bend and mold and stretch our lives to fit someone's construct and to fit within a certain notion of respectability. And I think we really have to like break it all the way down to the relationship, the quality and nature of the relationships, not the labels, but how everyone functions in everyone's life. What are the functions that you choose to serve, that you should serve? Let's take a strengths-based approach if we got to. Who's good at what? Who can do what to make sure this child or this group of children has everything they need? How can we do that? You know, how do we support, if it is a single mother, how do we support her in getting all of the things her child needs? If her child needs male influence, how do we get that? How do we get that to her? If it can't be the child's biological father, how do we get it? If she needs more resources, how do we get it to her? Like, I don't think we have time for shaming and throwing these labels and stuff around without also trying to acknowledge the deep structures. So
yeah, wonderful, brilliant stuff. So that that's probably a good point to move on to that. And just to remind everybody, do make sure you like the video. Please do like the video and share the conversation as well. Make sure you're subscribed to AfricansArise. And I will just give a quick plug for my Patreon channel while we're here. Do consider becoming a patron rather. That's the correct terminology of AfricansArise. So, you know, doing these videos is something that I do enjoy doing, and it's a real blessing to be able to do this and share, you know, get into some of these conversations with brothers and sisters like Sister Iyelli. However, I do want to make sure that this can be sustainable and make sure that I can continue to do, you know, put in the time that's required. So I've got my Patreon here, AfricansArise. have a look there anyways, patreon.com/AfricansArise. Thank you for those who are patrons already. There's two tiers at the moment. And at the moment, I'm committing to doing a monthly exclusive video for all patrons. And the first video that I did last week, which is on screen here, which is called Anti-Blackness is Deeply Embedded in Judeo-Christian Thought. And this is a video that went into quite deep into the roots of anti-Blackness as far as the Judeo-Christian tradition is concerned. And it actually went as far back, as the ancient Greeks, you know, because often we hear the ancient Greeks, they had no concept of, racism, and they loved Black people. But actually, as I break down in my video, that's not the full story. But anyway, yeah, so consider becoming an AfricansArise patron. But at the very, very, very least, please do share, like the video, and kind of thank you for the comments and so forth that are coming in, which we will touch on in a little while. Sorry, my English accent there. A little while.
My whole English language usage today is just off. I don't even know what's going on, but I understand you.
Good. This, it's not our language, man.
Right. See, and just some days my brain is not willing to accept this colonial language. So I don't know. I'm just, I'm all over the place.
Yeah. Good. So you sound very clear to me, by the way, very clear and very, very, very powerful. So I wanted to pivot. In a minute, I want us to talk about some of the examples of the involvement of mothers. Actually, you said mothers specifically in our liberation struggles in the past. So definitely want to spend a good time talking about that. But before we do so, when we think of the term mothering, we think of something that mothers do. And you've talked already today a little bit about this. And Diane Diakite, she introduces this idea of motherhood, or she writes about this idea of motherhood as a socio-ontological category. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe do you want to just like unpack that a little bit for us, please?
Well, I think it's almost it actually refers to directly back to what I was just talking about. I honestly think it's really about the function and role that a mother plays in the life of children, the life of a child, and making sure that we set priority, we place high priority on making sure that those functions, those roles are fulfilled, even if it cannot be fulfilled by the biological mother of a child or children. And so that she talks about the concept of other mothers, or if we're in Haiti, the makomère, right? The godmother, the auntie, someone in the community to fill that socio-ontological role in terms of rearing the child, providing for the child, guiding the child if the mother cannot be there or available. And I think that that's really an important strategy that helped us survive, again, chattel slavery. And then I think it's something that has also helped us survive all forms of dislocation. We have been forcibly moved and shifted and shuffled around the world. And so I think that we still practice that. Even in Black America, we got the concept of play cousins, play mother. It definitely refers back to this idea of fictive kin. African people on, so-called slave ships created fictive kin. People who shared the slave ship experience would adopt each other as kin, because obviously they know they had been ripped from their blood kin back home, but it was a way of reinscribing their humanity in this new hostile environment. How do I still hold on to my collectively constituted identity? African identity is not constituted individually. It's not me. It's not I am me. It's I am because we are, right? And so if I'm not a part of a family, I'm not a part of a collective, I cease to exist. I cease to understand myself as a human. I understand myself in relationship to other people. And so, again, not having always the luxury of being raised by our mothers, we really dug in deep and leaned into this socio-ontological category of motherhood so that we could slide in other people as needed into that role, charge them with the responsibilities and roles of a mother so that we know that we will be cared for and again, maintain our sense of ourselves as humans. So
Wonderful.
important.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the last live stream I did with a couple, a Ghanaian couple, and we were talking about the it takes a village thing.
So true. It does.
Yeah, and what I really like about this socio-ontological motherhood thing is that it helps to sort of helps to bring that that concept of it takes a village to raise a child. It helps to bring every one of us into that, rather than just saying, oh, it's just the woman who brought these children into existence and the father who sired them. It's every single one of our our jobs to be involved in some way in the children, in the people around us, in the children's lives.
And again, this becomes really important during slavery, but we've always had this. I mean, I guess it could be a co-wife, it could be a sister, a friend, an auntie, but it is the village. And also, I was reading some piece by, I guess, some white woman. I guess perhaps this is a feminist perspective, a white feminist perspective. But she was talking about the emotional labor of women, the emotional labor of a mother, to think about all the little details of running a household. And then, fathers and husbands sometimes, often don't have that extra emotional and mental labor of managing all of these details that make a child's life go. And I think this is an African solution to an age-old problem. You can't do it alone. If you try to do it alone, you're going to be raggedy and you're going to run yourself into the ground. And so you have to have support. You should, of course, be able to lean on your partner, your husband, for support. But having the village means that you don't get burned out as a mother having to do it all alone. It's not natural for us to do these things all alone and to make all of the decisions and have all of the understandings. If I couldn't go to someone for advice, I would lose it. If I couldn't go to someone for support, if my mother didn't help me care for my daughter in the early days. My daughter has a village. I got sister friends, actual sisters. She got all kinds of aunties and uncles and play cousins all over, because I understand the importance of that so that I don't get burned out. And it gives my daughter a diversity of perspectives, right? Sometimes I might say something to her and she may not really hear it. But if 3 other people from the village say the same thing, and she can't just go out here in the village and operate outside of good character, because everywhere she goes, there's accountability. Someone's going to check and make sure she's still operating in her good character. She knows that there's no place she can go and and do the wrong thing because the village surrounds her. And I think that's again, it's also a way of cultivating a good human. So I think that there's something really important to that is foundational to African worldview, but that takes on extra meaning in this new and hostile environment. Yeah,
brilliant. So I think we should talk about organization. I definitely want to talk about the historical examples of women in liberation, but it just seems more natural to move to talk about organizations and our African organizations, our Black organizations, because something that you've spoken about a fair bit is the importance of this modernity ethic, as we've unpacked it and elaborated it as something not just that women do, but something that we all can do. Applying this ethic in our organizations, and I think this is, for me, this is really powerful now when we're in that conversation. So please, I'll open the floor to you to talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, one of these days when I get my life together, I'm going to go and really put on paper some thoughts about what I would love to see happen in our organizations. And that is to really engage deeply with modernity and how we put this into practice in our organizations. One of the things I learned in my younger days, joining all these organizations and trying to be an activist and an organizer, is that I found myself surrounded by a bunch of kind of rogue individuals, very young people, often or maybe sometimes disillusioned old folks who felt like at some point they had to leave their families behind in order to and kind of separate themselves from family, to move politically the way that they chose to. And I always found that really sad. My family, my blood family, has come along with me in this journey, to various degrees, but I don't do anything without really talking to them about what I'm doing and trying to give them an opportunity. So right now, for instance, we're all boycotting Amazon for the Amazon boycott this week. They don't participate in everything I do, but I definitely felt the need to maintain a connection with them and the family support. These organizations, you'll see people dealing with trauma, but also trying to be an organizer. They're dealing with loneliness, housing instability, hunger, abuse, and also trying to liberate our people. And I'm like, you are broken down and raggedy, and you have no personal support in your personal life, and you want to come out here and free Black people? You can't. You're weak, and there are broken places that really must be healed, because you're bringing the dysfunction into the organization. You're going to act on and act out, and those losses and gaps in our lives, they play out in our organizations. Yep. And so, even if we're talking about just gender dynamics, or people with mommy issues or daddy issues, there's lots of that going on. And sometimes I would just sit back and watch the arguments, and people think they're arguing about ideology, but they're arguing about broken hearts and and stress that has nothing to do with the issue at hand. I'm just like, wow. So Mothernity really brings conflict resolution, the way mothers have to resolve conflict amongst the children. We have to bring those ethics of care. Did everyone at the meeting tonight have dinner before we started this meeting? Did everybody eat? Because someone might be cranky because they're hungry. That matters, right? Yeah. If your marriage is not okay and you just had a fight, and you bring that energy into this rally or this meeting we're about to have, you're going to cause problems. There are certain questions that are raised in organizations when we look at the humanity of all of the people present, all the people involved in this action, and we try to address those issues to whatever degree possible. We can, whatever degree is comfortable and possible, so that we can move ahead in a cohesive, unified, and as healthy a way as possible. I think in some organizations, it's almost like we mirror the corporate professional world, where our humanity has to leave and not be a part of what's going on. We reject this idea that we can be therapeutic in these spaces. I think a big criticism I hear of the Black Lives Matter movement is that it's too loosey-goosey and too therapeutic, and it's too hippy-dippy, and they're talking about feelings too much, and it's effeminate. And I'm like, no, you need more of this. You need to be healing yourself, because if a bunch of raggedy, traumatized people go out there, we're just going to reproduce the internal violence. And so that's what I'm saying. If I could create a manual or a set of, I think in the one Blacklash report, I actually wrote down a list of questions that I think people in organizations should ask one another, checkpoints and check-ins that we should do to bring the ethics and the practices of modernity into our organization, so that we can struggle in a healthy way. That's what I'm saying. It is Ubuntu. Thank you for that. That's really what I think we should try to take this out of the realm of theory, because I think there's so much that is immediately applicable. We can make this practical, really, really practical. I don't want to study anything about history if I can't apply it to my present life. And I find that modernity is something that is immediately practically applicable. I can read about a woman in 1736 in Antigua who was responsible for, if our leaders in this revolt die, who's going to get the resources and the stuff that was left behind? Who's going to get this man's, his weapons? Who's going to get the clothing, the shoes, the belongings, the food he has stored? Who's in charge of managing the resources? Who's in charge of making sure his children are okay? Those are the things that we need to have in our organizations. When John Henrik Clarke says, bury the man, continue the plan, when our leaders get assassinated, it is the women folk who made sure that legacy was protected, that families were fed and taken care of, that provisions were made. These are the things that we really have to talk about more openly and bring into the center of our operations. So that's what I'm saying.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Brilliant. Completely co-signed everything you've said there, and I've seen a similar thing as well in my experience in organizing. And one dimensionality was the thing that I was going to mention, which you've kind of said, is that there's this kind of this mold that we're just, okay, I'm a Pan-Africanist now. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I'm here. I'm going to talk about political stuff. I'm going to talk about organizing and revolution, and I'm going to understand scientific socialism. That's my background. Scientific socialism, and so yeah, all right. But the meeting finishes, and it's like, all right.
Right. This is something we run into a lot. I'm like, yeah, but you're, it's wonderful but you're a womanizer and you've left a 10 abused women and unfathered children in your wake. So how you out here trying to tell me about revolutionary Pan-Africanism and you can't even get your house in order? Like, this is how I'm looking at people. Like, again, you have to address the family issues. And that's how we build trust. That's how we build accountability, right? I don't trust someone who's out here and, she or he is out here running the streets doing wrong in their personal world and they want to tell me how to get free. You're creating problems. You can't tell me how to get free. So that's where I am with it.
Good. And now we can talk about some of the historical examples, because you mentioned there about the sister in Antigua, did you say? Who so in this lecture, which I will post a link to, by the way, the brother who's asking, we will find that link. Craig, in a minute.
Sorry, Craig.
He's asked again.
We'll post the link.
The link is coming. The link is coming. In that said lecture, you listed a number of examples of some quite obscure, actually, examples of sisters and women in our liberation struggles who who played massively important roles. So I think this would be a good place for us to begin our roundup of our back and forth. Anyway, if you could talk about some of those, perhaps.
Okay. So let's see. The 1736 example that I mentioned, I'll start there. That was a group of Africans, many of whom were from what is now the Gold Coast. The British would call them Coromantese, who they organized to try to take over the governor's mansion. And this is the administrative governor who essentially runs the island, runs the colony. And they were led in this struggle by a man named Court. And Court was advised by a woman named Queen, an elderly woman named Queen. Everyone called her Queen. Well, I was trying to put together, I'm always trying to connect dots. So I heard once Marimba Ani say that in many African languages, queen and mother are used interchangeably. So that's when I started really thinking about this mother thing. But this is an elderly woman who was his key advisor, again, strategist, managing resources. And I started looking around at other slave revolts, so-called slave revolts or insurrections in places like Barbados and Jamaica, New York, the Carolinas, Virginia, elsewhere, wherever were found. And I tried to see if there were patterns that emerged. And I did. Everywhere I went, I didn't just see the guy who led the slave revolt. I saw dyads. I saw pairs, a man and a woman who was usually referred to as a mother or a queen. And I started to try to connect those back to African cultures and African cultural institutions. And so looking at the Akan, meta ethnicity, the Akans, I saw that many people who have been taken from this region, from this ethnic group, they had an institution called Ohema, the Queen Mother. That is a title, that is a role in society. And it was so similar. The Queen Mother, the Ohema, that's such a similar role to what I saw these women doing in these pairs, in places like Antigua and Barbados and Jamaica. So these women were essentially queen mothers who did their thing that they have been doing for thousands of years, which is advising, guiding, strategizing around building building a nation. And so it wasn't just that these enslaved Africans in Antigua in 1736, in New York in 1741, in New York even before that in 1712, and Jamaica in 1760 were trying to get personally, individually free. That wasn't enough for them. They were trying to establish sovereign territories for themselves in these slave colonies. And how we know that is they had a queen mother. She is the sign and symbol of the new nation state. At least for this ethnic group, I could isolate down to an ethnic group, and that helped me create like a case study. And again, I'm sure that this exists in other African cultures, but what makes the Akan example easy to see is because they were so nationalistic. I mean, essentially, the British interrupted them in this process of unification and expansion. And so when they were taken out of these, you know, as prisoners of war, et cetera, when they were extracted from that environment and brought over here, they still had nation building on the brain. You know, they were still oriented toward let's build empire. So again, when you have this guy named Court and this woman named Queen in Antigua in 1736, they're trying to take over the governor mansion and establish Antigua as the new Akan state. And this is going to be all of ours. Like, they didn't know how to not be sovereign people. Like, that just wasn't even a concept for them. It got to the point where the British tried to pass laws against, you know, to ban the importation of Coromantes, this specific group of Africans. Like, no more of this group, because they're always giving us the most trouble. But I think that concept of trying to build nations and build sovereignty or sovereign territory was such a direct threat to the British Empire. It's like African Empire, British Empire. Like, yeah, you got to have a concept of that. We do too. We're not okay with this slavery thing. And they were highly organized. This was a group that was able to maintain its own naming traditions, even over here. You know, some of them had British names. You know, there's Sarah, an enslaved African woman named Sarah in the New York Revolt of 1741, or the Negro Conspiracy of 1741, who was encouraging her fellow Africans to chop off the heads of their enslavers. She was talking about how sharp the knives were and everything. And I'm reading this in trial records and testimonies, right? They're getting these people to talk about these things before they, of course, execute them. But, you know, these women are using spiritual gifts and talents, mediumship. They're possessing spirit and receiving messages from the divine on what, where, how, when. They're leading rituals to purify the folks, to swear them to secrecy, to bind them to their ancestors, to protect them spiritually from essentially the death that they're about to enact, you know? So there are all kinds of roles that women are playing, ways in which they're mothering the people. And we can even talk about how they play roles in the aftermath. When people die, they're the ones leading the funerary rites and rituals. When young women and girls are raped and violated, they're the ones caring for their bodies and repairing their bodies with herbal medicines, with other types of women care. Waist beads have special significance, right? This is a part of your body that's going to be constantly violated and taken from you, but I want you to remember that this is sacred. So they're doing that kind of work. This is all mothering and modernity that keeps us sane and helps us continue to fight for freedom. So, yeah. Lots of examples.
yeah, and I definitely recommend people go and check out. Not now, but
not now, Craig.
Yeah, after we finish, check out the lecture, which I did post the link to, because Sister Iyelli does go into much more detail on a lot of those examples there. So where's I was trying to put it on screen, but I can't find it for some reason. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, and I also want to make sure I mention the Maroons, because when we're thinking about examples, you can really take any Maroon society. And again, we can go beyond Akan-based examples. We can talk about Seferina and Acotirene in the Maroon community of Palmares, that society. In Brazil, you can, any of the Maroon societies is a perfect example of modernity. It's examples of how to add mothering and women folk into the story of resistance means that you're talking about sustainability. It's not just we're going to go out there and kill these people and be free for a time until they decide to come get us again. It's we're going to build societies and reproduce in those societies. We're going to have babies and keep it going. We're going to have the rituals and rites that measure out the life cycle of human beings, birth rights, marriage, the funerary rights. We're going to make sure that we reinscribe our humanity in all these ways. We're going to protect the babies and the elders. So this is what makes a maroon society, that it's meant to last. It's meant to last beyond just the immediate generation that takes its freedom. So I think that this is, I think it's almost like the blind spot for the feminine power, the feminine institutions, is why we don't talk about maroons as much as we should. Why you can go to, for instance, the Blacksonian. This is a major critique of the Blacksonian. They talk about free black towns, but in the whole museum, I think I could find like 2 paragraphs on a really small sign about maroons and that history. And we know now from the work of Sylviane Diouf and others that there were maroon communities in North America. There's an assumption that there were none here. They're only in the Caribbean. And she defies all of that. Diouf defies all of that thinking in her work, and yet somehow this doesn't find very much space in this museum about Black history, this National Museum about Black history. So, and I think again, it's because we marginalize the specific contributions of women and feminine institutions like Mothernity in the storytelling and the narratives around our freedom movements.
Wow. And there was one more thing you mentioned about burials, how how women often do the burial rituals, and that made me think of I don't know her name, this is the bad thing, but the woman in Haiti who buried Jean-Jacques Dessalines, I think. And I think there was maybe 1 or 2 women who played like a really important role in that whole ceremony that was done at was it Boukman Dati, and this woman kind of led this ceremony to basically get the revolution started, and I don't even know her name, to my shame.
Cécile Fatima.
What? Say again?
Cécile Fatima.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting that her last name Fatima indicates like an Islamic influence. Obviously, there was a significant percentage of us who were Muslims when we were brought over here, right? But yeah, she led several rituals all over the island, right? All over Saint-Domingue, to bring about this revolt in what will become Haiti. And she's not acknowledged as much as we hear about Dati Boukman. But instrumental. We can talk about Tontoya, who raised Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and there's some evidence that she may have been a Dahomey, an Amazon, a Mino from the Dahomean society. So she brought her soldiering skills, her training as a soldier, to bear in raising this son to be a soldier, a warrior. And so the woman, the mentoring, the training, we just transplant those understandings and those roles and that knowledge over here. And yeah, Boy Kaima is the most famous and kind of the iconic ritual that brings about the revolution in Haiti, but it's not the only one. There are rituals going on for even years ahead of 1791 to bring this about. There are rituals all over the island, but that is the primary ritual. Yes. And she definitely also presided over that one. So yeah, and I mean, and the Haitian example really does show you, because one, Haiti is, or Saint-Domingue at that point, the French colony, is the site of such an important melding of a bunch of different African ethnicities and backgrounds into something potent and powerful. Vodou is a Pan-African religion, right? Vodou is made up of all the toughest stuff we got because we used it to fight. And I think that that's why Vodou becomes voodoo and gets turned into something really scary in the imaginations of Europeans, because of its instrumentality. Is that a word? Instrumentality in the Haitian Revolution, right? And the fact that you can't really fully think that you've talked about the Haitian Revolution without acknowledging the role of women. People like Bernard White talks about even like teenage girls participating in the Haitian Revolution, out there collecting weapons and bullets from the French soldiers, out there on the battlefield, chanting, going, the funerary rituals, they matter. And it's not all necessarily revolving around the concept of war, although it is there. But it really is just, again, thinking about the ways in which modernity guides our lives on and off of the battlefield. Those same young women who came up with chants and stuff on the battlefield saying, bring on death, bring on death. I ain't scared. I ain't scared. You can see a 16-year-old group of Black girls doing that today. You can imagine that at any moment in history. Like, that's our thing. We're creative. We do those things, but we're trying to motivate and pump ourselves up. And we can literally call down the spirits of war. And we have that skill. But we also, when we lose someone, we're the ones who are curating the emotions and the psychological fallout from the loss. We're the ones singing the dirges and the sad songs to stimulate crying so people can go to the crying, do the necessary grieving, and get through it so that we don't hold that grief and it doesn't manifest itself in some other unhealthy way in our community. Those are the roles of modernity. Tupac says it's a wonder why we ain't crazy, but it's not a wonder. It's African culture. Like, that's why we ain't crazy, because our culture has all kinds of medicine in it to keep us from being crazy. And modernity really is like an entry point into talking about all of that.
Yeah. Woo! That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
You're so complimentary. I appreciate it.
No, I'm serious as well, and it's echoed in the, in some of the comments here as well. So we better touch on some of these comments then and questions, and then we'll round up, whatever the word is, like finish. So make sure you smash the like button. So a couple of comments and questions. Modernity has fangs. That was probably still remains the quote of the conversation. Leah Buggs, shout out to you.
Hi, Leah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Akadi Ellie mentioned. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we've done that already. Now, Princess Eminem says we still use spiritual authorities, especially in times of need. Yeah, of course.
That's definitely true. Even those of us who identify more openly as Christians. In my travels in Africa and other parts of the Black world, even those of us who identify as Christians or Muslims, when things really hit the wall and we really get into a state of crisis and we need immediate help, we usually do turn to that other stuff, the African stuff.
Yeah.
We're like, let me go to this seer, this woman who could see. Let me go to this brother who got the formula. He has the potion, the herbs, the thing that can make it happen. Let me go check this other type of expertise. Like, we really do return home to those spiritual authorities when we are in times of need. So that's an excellent point.
It won't be stamped out. I've seen how the colonialists were just like, much to their chagrin, that just these people, they're Christians, but they keep turning to the witch, but
they won't let witchcraft go. They won't let it go. But what we fail to realize often is that's why we're still here. That's why when the stuff is on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shakara Bandaka, peace to you, family. And he says,
how you doing?
Big up to Dr. Ichile. Now, Sister Leah did ask a question here. Says, can you speak to the damage this idea that Black women, particularly in America, have about not needing a man, they can do it by themselves, etc., etc.?
Yeah, I definitely think that is a damaging approach, a damaging perspective. I think the concept of need is also, again, the language. This language is so perverted, and it just produces so much flatness. It's just crude. It just it doesn't help us say anything right. Honestly, English is so limiting, but I don't like this way of talking. We all need each other. We need each other. African men and women, we need each other. We need each other, even if we're not talking about within the context of a marriage needing, we need healthy relationships with each other. We definitely need that. If we are to be balanced, you know, in most indigenous worldviews, health is balance. Balance is health. It's defined that way. And so I think it's just really short-sighted and really, really destructive to say that you don't need the other half of your humanity, half of the humanity that shares your lineages and shares your blood and shares your identity. So like, I wouldn't tell anyone my daughter doesn't need her father. I would never, right? You know, I think is gross. I don't like hearing that. I think saying honestly in detail that you've experienced trauma, that you've experienced even a pattern of unhealthy relationships is valid and is real. Saying that you have become quite independent and capable of caring for yourself is valid and real, and you can believe that and hold tight to that. Saying that you do not wish to be a wife in the ways that people traditionally think of a wife is valid and real. But saying that we don't need a man is such a blanket general statement with no nuance, no sophistication, and it really is meant to hurt and damage and divide. So that's how I feel about that statement. I think women who say that really just are projecting a lot of hurt feelings and bad experiences, and are just making a crude statement without really saying what's really going on and articulating it clearly. You know, but on the flip side, there is, and I think another thing they're responding to is this notion that you do need a man, and that being a wife is the only way to be validated or valued in the world. And I think that is a problem too. Because I think I'm a valuable member of my community, my family, my society, and I don't happen to have a man, you know, in that sense. But I would like one, you know. I know the role that a man of my own would fill in my life. You know what I mean? Like, I know what I'm missing. I know what I don't have that I would like to have, that I need, that would provide, bring my life into a different type of balance. So I think that's where I am with it. I don't know if I'm being clear, but
yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think you've thoroughly answered that question. Rise up from the Gambia. I've got viewers from the Gambia. Mo and Amma. Out to you, my family. And I think there was a couple more comments just down the bottom here.
Yeah, there were a couple more questions.
There's one from Dr Iyelli.
So that's a former student of mine. Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, he's a course of mine at UMBC, University of Maryland at Baltimore, entitled Women in Africa and the African Diaspora. And he was like the best student in that class. And I thought that was just really refreshing for a young brother to, you know, do so well and be so curious and really deeply engaged in studying Black women. Honestly, you know, maybe that's me and my bias, but I was just super surprised at how much he really took to that class and what he took from that class. So anyway,
speaks to he must be quite a secure brother, you know.
Yeah, he's dope.
Good to have you on board. And so he says, do we raise our children to be prepared for offense as much as healing? And by offense, I presume, does he mean?
You mean like offense versus?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I read it as offense, taking offense, but yes, that your interpretation.
Right. To fight as much as to heal. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm struggling with how much detail to say on this, but absolutely.
Top line, no details. Some of this stuff needs to be...
My answer to that question is yes, we should.
Good. And then let's have a look. Here we go. He found that quite funny. Last one here then. So from Mo and Amma, still with us in the Gambia, says, can you speak on reproduction and the high death rate for Black women? Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, let me just say I can. I did I posted a short video on my channel, a snippet. I recommend a video by a guy called what's his name, Biko Mandela Gray,
Okay.
and he's got a lecture called on not standing a chance, and he basically talks about how, you know, Black people being viewed as objects and how that kind of you know, manifests itself in, back in the day, it manifested itself in them, you know, Europeans doing experiments on Black people with no anesthetic and just, you know, ripping jaws out and performing multiple surgeries with no anesthetic. And it manifests itself today in, as far as the opinions of medical students in surveys that have been done, where they say Black people have higher pain thresholds, and, you know, the thicker skin and all these kinds of things. So for me, my speech to that point is that it speaks to how we are viewed, you know, what we are viewed as by non-Blacks.
Yeah.
You know, but sorry, yeah. And then would your...
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is definitely kind of related to what I'm thinking in response to this matter. And this is why, again, it's like it's there's so much of what we have done to try to reinscribe our humanity and defy the processes of thingification and you know, as Martin Luther King says, thingification and objectification. One of the biggest losses that we've suffered is the disconnect from our own healing, birthing traditions. And there are many culture bearers, and there are many people who have tried really hard to hold on to midwifery, for instance, and our birthing traditions. And they are at the forefront of this struggle against the insane rates of maternal mortality and infant mortality in the African community. There are Black midwives who are struggling to maintain their right to practice the traditions of birthing that keep us alive. J. Marion Sims, I think, is someone that was referred to in the piece you were talking about just now, who is a white, I don't even know if I would call him a physician. He's a torture artist who used Black women's bodies, enslaved women's bodies, to practice various surgical and examination techniques. So, you know, he's credited for creating the speculum.
Yeah.
And, you know, that whole process begins with, I believe, 2 spoons rigged together, and you just jam them into the bodies of enslaved African women, and practicing and trying to refine a surgical technique to repair fistulas. I'm not even going to talk about what fistulas are, but again, purchasing and using these enslaved African women without anesthesia to, you know, some of them bled out and died, you know, using enslaved African women to hold down the African women who are writhing in pain during these surgeries. So they're making us participate also in our own mutilation and torture. All of this really does lend itself directly to a mentality that Black bodies don't experience pain the way others do. I mean, there's the whole early period of medical science in the Western world, and that is Europe and America, is really devoted to trying to prove that our skulls are thicker and we don't feel pain, our skin is thicker, we don't feel pain, you know, we don't blood doesn't circulate through our bodies the same way, our jaw angles indicate different things, lumps on our skulls. I mean, just they really tried to use our bodies as a battleground to prove that we are something less than human, and that all the abuses of slavery and colonization do not affect us the same way, so that they could sleep at night, so they could believe themselves to be good Christians, and that their consciences remain intact, and that these ideas are pervasive today, these beliefs that Africans don't feel pain, and also really just to invalidate us as thinking human beings who can articulate, this hurts, right? Serena Williams found out the hard way that Black women are not treated well. It doesn't matter how many millions of dollars you have, we're not treated and respected. When we say I'm in pain, that is not respected, and that is not understood and validated in the way that other women's pain is. And I think that that's really important. Yes, the whole field is called scientific racism, I guess now, when back in the day it was just called science. And this is really important in terms of supporting Black midwives, doulas. I'm trained as a, I guess what they call like a sister, a birthing sister. You know, I volunteered a few years ago to try to be like a sister buddy partner to support pregnant Black women who don't have support networks. Shout out to Amandla Haynes and other people in Tallahassee, Florida, working on this. But this is a program that is nationwide because Black women are just like, we have to come to our own rescue if the medical establishment will not. And regain our connection to our traditions to get these numbers down, because Black women in the so-called developed world have infant and maternal mortality rates that are on par with women in so-called third world countries. So us being in these highly modernized 21st century societies has not saved us, has not given us better birth outcomes. So we really do have to think about that.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I've, you know, in the last year, I've had my youngest son, or my wife had my youngest son. And yeah, that's all of these things we, you know, confronted with these statistics and facts. And certainly, yeah, we did look at, you know, potential for doulas and things like hypnobirthing and stuff. But unfortunately, we weren't aware really of any African-centered kind of approaches to these things. So it's great to hear that, you know, you're involved in
yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a Black midwife at the DC birthing center. My daughter's born in Washington, DC. Shout out to Mama Ebony, who is one of the warriors on the forefront of this fight. There's so many more resources now, but it really is hard to find them. I you know, I just happen to live in a place where I have access. So my heart goes out to people who don't find it. Because at one point I wanted to collect Black women's birthing stories. And then the more I started talking with women about their birthing stories, the darker it became. And by dark, I mean the more sinister it became.
Yeah.
It was, I was like, I thought this was going to be a joyful collection of happy stories. And it was trauma. It was trauma and neglect and hostility and lack of support. And I was just floored. So.
Wow. I mean, gosh. All right. Well, you know what? This comment sums it up. Yeah. Thank you so much for touching on that. Yes, I've got loads more questions and whatnot, but what I don't have is much time between now and going to get my children from the nursery. So, I don't have the ability to push back the time I need. But Iyelli, it's been absolutely phenomenal speaking with you today. And I just want to put this comment on here as well. Just read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, Dr Iyelli said. Thank you so much for the insights you've dropped and the openings that you've kind of given us. You know, the sort of the avenues for further research that we can do and thinking that we can do and ideas that we can ponder and chew on and so forth. It's been really generative. That's my new word, my new buzzword. I'm starting to say a lot. Generative. Do you have any closing comments that you want to say, and maybe point people to where they might be able to find out some of your research and get into more detail on some of these ideas that you've spoken about today?
Sure. I really just would like to thank you, one, for having me. This has been lovely talking with you as always. Thank you to everyone who is here and in the chat. I've appreciated the comments and the questions. My whole thing is I just want African people, wherever they are in the world, to study the traditions that have helped us to survive and do what our ancestors have done, which is apply them in this moment and make them useful in this moment. It means it's okay to adapt, but definitely get to the deep structures and the underlying principles at work. And there you'll find the medicine. And I think it doesn't mean rejecting everything the 21st century has to offer, because we've created a lot of this too, but it does mean finding a way to get to the deep wisdom of what has helped us to survive and applying it to this moment unapologetically, to think collectively and support one another. And I think that we can win. I think we can win. You can find me at my first and last name, all one word, on Instagram. I'm at Dr Ichile, Dr Ichile on Twitter. My name can help you find me on Facebook as well, spelled exactly as it is. And also you can look me up through the African American Studies Institute at Prince George's Community College. So AASI at PGCC. And I'm there. I'm out here in the internets. And I thank you again.
Wonderful stuff. Okay, well, thank you once again, and yeah, I wish you a blessed rest of the day, and everyone in the comments and chats, thank you so much for participating and liking and sharing as well. And I will see you next time for our next live stream, which hopefully will be in April with another sister, Sister Only Love Chika of the Prophetic Whirlwind Ministries, where I'm sure we'll pick up some of the strands from this conversation as well. She comes from a slightly different type of tradition. Spiritual tradition, but you know, all of these things, these boundaries that we place on our, you know, spiritual experiences and you know, experiences of life are, in my opinion, unnecessary. We can break bread with whichever traditions that we come from. Yeah, wonderful stuff. Okay, then. So peace out, everybody, and see you soon.